Okay. Okay. Good evening, town meeting members and other colleagues. It is 7 o'clock on November 17th. We are now reconvening the fall town meeting of 2022. And before we officially open or begin the proceedings, I'm going to turn the mic over to Bernard Green, who has a sad announcement.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Very sad news, and the type that, frankly, I'm not really a great person to convey. But I heard, through Bobby Nable's son that Bobby Nable passed away in the last day or two. For those of you who don't know Bobby Nable, she was an incredibly beloved town meeting member of the advisory committee, and I might add the Martin Luther King Celebration Committee. Among her many incredible contributions to the town of Brookline. She was one of the early Black residents of Brookline, and her story has been told in a video that the MLK committee participated in and screening at the Coolidge Corner Theater that you can watch through the webpage of the MLK committee. But Bobby Nable was an incredible human being, beloved by everyone, and such an incredible person who made huge contributions to our town and beyond. So I'm sorry I have to bring this news, but I think it's important for a town meeting to know, because so many people know and have worked with Bobby Nable over the years. So thank you.
Thank you. And condolences to, I guess, everybody, all of us. Okay, the schedule for tonight. We have a few preliminary motions, which will be moving the order of some articles. And then we will be going through the ZAB articles and cross our fingers that we get through them. If we do, because of the articles that are getting moved, we will then get to the beekeeping article, which is Article 33. So first, we have a motion by Ms. Heller, seconded by Mr. Lynn Jones, to move Articles 11, 12, and 13 to November 29th. So since it's been moved and seconded, we can take a vote on it now. Has the voting started? Okay.
We have 190 yes, 4 no, 9 abstentions.
Okay, the motion passed with 198 yes, 4 no, and 9 abstentions. We will now return to Article 23, which we were in the middle of discussing last night. Article 23, as I'm sure you recall, is the Community Choice Aggregation Home Rule Petition, which seeks to amend that program to, among other things, increase the price charged to participants per kilowatt hour for their use of utility or electricity in that program. We were in the middle of conversation with Mr. Selwyn, and I promised that we would return to him, and I am doing so now. Lee Selwyn? And yeah, I'm having a little trouble hearing speakers sometimes, so. Great, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, because I'm getting a message that the host is not allowing me to unmute.
Yeah, we can't see you though.
Yeah,
We're
okay.
seeing your ear, and that's okay.
Sorry. I just wanted to say, I'm Lee Selwyn, town meeting member, precinct 13, and a member of the advisory committee, but I'm not speaking for the advisory committee tonight. I just want to respond to the sad news we just heard. I worked with Bobby for many years on advisory, and we will miss her. I have some slides that I had sent along. Hopefully they can be shown.
To the extent you are giving a presentation, you are of course limited to 3 minutes, and I understand that you had a question for Scott Englander as well.
Well, Scott cleared up the discrepancy by an email he sent this afternoon, so I think we're past that.
Okay.
The principal concern that I have about Article 23 is I think it's actually detrimental to what ZAB is trying to accomplish, and I'd like to explain why. In this first slide, these are the rates that are in effect right now in Brookline community aggregation. And they range from 10.7 cents for Brookline Basic on up to 13.7 cents for all green. Next slide. These are the rates that will become effective in January, and they range from about 14.8 cents for basic to 18.7 cents for all green. And on the next slide, I've plotted the two together and indicated the extent of the increase, and the increase ranges from about 4 cents to close to 5 cents. Now, this is only part of the consumer's electric bill. If we have the next slide, this is a portion of my November Eversource bill, and what it does is it indicates the portion that is the Brookline Brookline Community Aggregation Supply Service from Direct Energy, and then all of those numbers at the bottom relate to the delivery charge. And if you take the total delivery charge and divide it by the number of kilowatt hours, which in my case was 1,014, and I should point out that about 400 of that is electric vehicle charging, so I'm not that big a consumer. Next slide. What I'm showing here is that if you add everything up, you end up with rates. We have about a 15-cent delivery charge, and you add that to the now increased community aggregation rates, and we end up with rates ranging from 29 cents and change to 33 cents. And if we add the 2 cents that ZAB is proposing in Article 23, we go from 31 to 35 cents. Now, here's sort of the key point. If somebody is actually up at that high end and they want to avoid the 2 cents, they can simply switch to a less green option. So for example, if you're on the middle plan, Brookline Green, and you switch to Brookline Basic, you can pretty much recover the 2 cents. So there is a clear incentive to for consumers to do that. Now, the issue is, will they? Well, let's take a look at what the pattern of use has been of the various plans. Next slide. So this is data that I pulled from the Brookline Community Aggregation, Brookline Green website, and some documents that were provided there. And what's happening here is that it turns out that some 95% of all of the 20,000 or so Brookline customers who are on the community aggregation plan basically take the cheap service. They do not take the green service. Only about 5% take the all green service. And this although it's been growing slightly, it hasn't grown by very much. And so what we're ending up with is a demonstration that customers are price sensitive and that they are not accepting the higher prices. If you raise the price to 2 cents that ZIAB is suggesting, I submit that that will cause customers to move away from green service and over to a less expensive and more fossil fuel intensive offering. And finally, the last point I wanted to make is that ZIAB is suggesting that the 2 cent increase could be offset by time of use pricing. And as others have suggested, the metering infrastructure to support time of use pricing at this time, and we're not anywhere near close to it, or demand-driven pricing. But more importantly, there's no linkage in the warrant article between the 2 cent increase and the introduction of time of use pricing. So all we are going to see is a 2 cent increase and no immediate offset. And for those reasons, I strongly urge no action on this proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Mr. Gray.
Fantastic. Thank you. I too will be missing Bobby, who was a wonderful member of the Precinct 10 delegation and had such a big heart and was such a bright person. On Article 23, we are.
I'm sorry, could you introduce yourself, even though you're well known by now? And
I'm sorry.
you have
Yes.
3 minutes as well.
Jesse Gray, town meeting member in Precinct 10 and the chair of the Zero Emissions Advisory Board, which introduced these articles. We are beginning on a shared journey together. And I often think of something Ronald Reagan said when he said that you should trust and verify. And on the one hand, I appreciate that this body trusts the ZIAB to lead us on a new journey toward a sustainable community. And on the other hand, I equally well appreciate the patience of this body in verifying that the direction that we are taking you is a good direction. And that's not easy because these are not simple matters. And it's easy to be misled until you have the complete picture. So thank you for your trust and thank you for your verification. And I would love to spend as much time as possible on questions and answers. I just wanted to say a few brief words and I'll yield the rest of my time to Q&A. What I wanted to say about warrant Article 23 is that it really is trying to accomplish two basic things. One, raise a little bit of money to help us electrify. And if we did decide to do the 2 cents a kilowatt hour, it would raise close to $3 million a year. So it's a substantial sum for electrification. And the kinds of things we could use it for is helping people install car chargers in those parking lots that probably need some trenching, and smart car chargers that could be used for demand reduction, by the way. And we could use it for other kinds of electrification, putting solar canopies over the town parking lots. And So that's part one. It's a way of generating some money to kickstart this transition that we need to undertake together. The second part of the article is contrary to some of what's been said, it's actually very focused in a very deep way on keeping electricity costs down. And so it's hard to understand because it's a little counterintuitive. Why are we asking to raise rates by 2 cents and then claiming that we're going to be reducing rates? But sometimes the world is a complicated place. And the way that it works is that a lot of what we pay for electricity is dependent on the peak amount of electricity we use. So through demand reduction, we can avoid having to turn on dirty power plants at certain times using our most expensive electricity generation. And through reducing demand, we can also avoid expensive distribution upgrades like new transformers. And in the long run, this will help keep the cost of electrification low. So those are the two motivations for this article. And I also want to emphasize that there is a strong incentive for the management, which is the town, of this program to keep costs low. And I can tell you that the town takes that responsibility very seriously. And so there is built-in protection because anyone can leave. Now, if they leave, they're still
Could
on
you
a
finish
green
up,
grid.
please, Mr. Gray?
Sure. I can stop there and I encourage everyone to line up and ask any question you want, because I think if we can clarify for everyone what this is really about, it'll help us all move forward. Thank you.
Okay, I think we will get to those questions during the rest of the evening. Well, thank you very much. Now call on Mr. Warren.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you, Paul Warren, Precinct 1. Article 23 has been presented as one component of an interconnected set of articles that we're being encouraged to consider and vote on as a slate. These articles include tax increases that are being positioned as incentives to raise as much as $16 million annually from an estimated 8,000 residents. These tax increases don't feel like incentives to me. They feel like penalties. In many cases, penalties for past actions that were considered to be the best or only choice at the time. I'd like to give you some examples, personal examples. Amy and I spent a significant amount of money just 5 years ago to replace an oil and gas heating system with a highly efficient condensing gas boiler. At the time, we did what we thought was best and what we could do within our financial means to help with climate change. Yet these articles will penalize us for that well-intentioned action. Voting yes on Article 26 and 28 may result in as much as a 25% increase in our annual heating costs and as much as a 3% increase in our real estate taxes. This would add thousands of dollars annually to our household budget, which is already under significant pressure due to inflation. And I know that many of my constituents and neighbors and many on this Zoom are in a similar situation. In order to avoid these additional taxes, we would need to completely replace our heating system again at a cost that would far exceed our recent investment. And switching to a new system would increase our electricity use that Article 23 is making more expensive. All of this feels like a penalty to me, a penalty for doing what we thought was right just a short time ago. And these tax increases, by the petitioner's own estimates, total thousands of dollars annually, would certainly limit our ability to financially support future overrides, something that Amy and I have been pleased to do each and every time in the past. Similarly, this summer we had to replace our family car. Thankfully, none of the children were hurt in it. We did have a bad accident. We searched for an EV without success. They just weren't available or way outside of our price range. So we were limited to purchasing a gasoline vehicle with the expectation that it would last 10 years or more. Article 29 would increase and perhaps double our annual excise tax. We could trade in the new gasoline car and get an EV if it's available, but that would cost us thousands of dollars and we would take a big depreciation hit. Again, it feels like a penalty for doing something that we had to do. I have other concerns as well. Article 23's policy of charging higher electric rates to those who have 100% green does not make sense. I think the policy will actually move people away from it, as Lee Selwyn said. I also believe that Brookline is not in the best position or even capable of running and issuing and managing loans as proposed by Article 21. There are other entities that have this competency and we should go to them. Article 25's proposal that may displace aspects of the state building code seem just unsafe and unwise to me. I'm unable to support the proposed policies in the articles, including Article 23, and the significant ZEB tax increases and penalties that will put many of our fellow residents in an unfair and perhaps impossible financial situation. Please join me in voting no on all of the ZEB articles. Thank you.
I will allow you to make your point of privilege, and I will interpret it very narrowly. So make sure it is actually a point of privilege, Mr. Gray. What is it you would like to say?
Madam Moderator, yesterday, I thought you very appropriately exhorted us to focus on the article at hand. And I do think that if we stray from that, this conversation will be much more challenging. Much of what we just heard was not about the article at hand. And I
That is actually a point of order.
Okay.
And I'm going to deny it. If everybody, I'm going to deny it. I understand the basis of it. And we're moving on. Okay, Mr. Penzel.
Okay, thank you. I had a little bit of trouble unmuting. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Mark Penzel, Precinct 2, and Advisory Committee member speaking solely for myself. As a general comment, I'd first like to say that since some might find it unseemly for the petitioners to toot their own horns, I'd like to take the chance to do it for them. I am new at all of this, but in just the few months that I've had the chance to see both their work, past and current, and to see them at work, I've been incredibly impressed by their knowledge, their smarts, their responsiveness, their courtesy, and their patience in fielding all the questions and inquiries that have been thrown their way. They are clearly leaders in the field. They have a track record of success, and they have selflessly devoted untold hours to providing Brookline the tools the town will need to address the climate crisis and get us to net zero by 2040, which is the goal our town meeting established. Specifically, regarding Article 23, I'd like to ask Mr. Gray 4 questions that have occurred to me while listening to some of Article 23's doubters. First, and may he answer these one at a time, or should I ask them all at once?
I would go one at a time.
Okay. Mr. Gray, how is Article 23 going to save us money? And in other words, how, in a corollary of that, is this notion of counterintuitiveness you mentioned, and Mr. Selwyn's point that why are we taxing electricity when we want to move people towards electricity?
Great question. What we pay for in electricity is we pay to make sure there's electricity at the times when it's most needed, and that's on the supply side. And what we also pay for is the ability of the distribution grid at the times when we need the most electricity to deliver it. So to the extent that we can implement demand response programs, which are not, by the way, in the interest of the utility, the utility's interest is in installing as many transformers as they can. But to the extent that we can implement demand reduction, we can save money both on the electricity supply and on the electricity distribution. And that's how this article will save money.
Okay, so sort of another corollary to that is some people seem to be saying earlier yesterday, I think, that Article 23 will require expensive smart meters to be successful. Are they correct? And if not, why not?
Right, so they are not correct. And in fact, I participate in a pilot demand response program, so that's how I can definitively say it's not correct. I am in a pilot program that Eversource runs that compensates me for charging my car during off hours. And all that it needs to do is connect to my car. There's no smart meter involved. And there's similar programs that work with electric car chargers rather than the smart car, just a smart charger. So there is not a need for a smart meter.
Okay, and you may have already answered this earlier, but why haven't the utilities been doing what Article 23 proposes?
So it's counterintuitive. I was surprised when I learned this, but the business model of a utility is that they get a guaranteed roughly 10% return on investment on most any capital expenditure. So they're highly incentivized to install as much capital equipment as they can, transformers, lines, substations. And so it's actually counter to their financial interest to reduce demand through demand response programs. Now, they're often required to do it, but they do as little of it as they can. And that's why, as Scott Englander was explaining yesterday, even though people thought decades ago that this would be a smart thing to do, it simply hasn't happened.
Okay, and lastly, about Article 23, how will the town have the appropriate expertise to implement it?
That's also a great question. So in Massachusetts, there's 3 brokers for community choice aggregation, and these are highly expert professionals. The broker for the town of Brookline is called Good Energy, and they hold the hand of the town through the process of acquiring and signing a contract, which is something that needs to happen every 2 or 3 years. So we just signed a contract a few months ago. They explain everything. They hold the hand of the town, and they actually are a potential partner in expanding the ability of community choice aggregation to do these kinds of things. In fact, they're also involved in lobbying the legislature to be able to do these kinds of things. So they're a partner not only in implementing these programs, but also in helping to actually make this happen.
Okay, thanks. I don't have any other questions. I do want to say, just in response to a comment made earlier, that I was interested in Mr. Selwyn's charts, and he indicated that only 5% have signed up for the 100% green option. So it seems to me that if that's if you're worried about losing people, you're not going to lose that many, because you have all those at 95% already. So anyway, that's just an observation I made personally. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Lowe, Werner Lowe. Please identify yourself, and you have 3 minutes. And I just want to make a comment that there are, about 18 people who have signed up on the chat line. And I'm going to go through the people who signed up in advance first, just because I think it's fair.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Werner Lowy. I'm Town Meeting Member Precinct 13, a member of the Zero Emissions Advisory Board. And first, since Mr. Warren addressed the question of the car he bought recently, I'd like to mention that I actually have a very similar experience. I bought a plug-in hybrid 4 years ago, and if I had to pay an excise tax surcharge on that, I wouldn't be happy either, any more than I like sending a check to the IRS every April. But in fact, as I'll explain in some detail when we get to Warrant Article 29, I won't have to pay any surcharge. And since this surcharge isn't likely to go into effect for at least a couple of years, Mr. Warren won't either. So please stay tuned when we discuss Warrant Article 29. what I'd like to say about this warrant article 23 is that it moves us toward innovative changes in a program that itself has been very innovative and has been hugely successful. And there, people are concerned because there's a certain amount of uncertainty in that kind of move, but that's inevitable. The new ideas are exactly what the climate movement here in Brookline has been about for the past 20 years. We did the first climate action plan, at least one of the first climate action plans in the state. We had one of the first chapters of Mothers Out Front. And looking at this particular community choice aggregation program, although we weren't the first community to have a program at all, we were the very first to have a significant green component. The state DPU dragging its feet on this program for years. You made an article about they've spent, I think 18 months or more waiting to making other communities wait to have their programs approved. And they've not only that in that, but they certainly have shown no interest in. But as you've heard in the presentation last night and you're hearing tonight, we have ideas to improve this program, and all this warrant article asks is that we be given permission to do that. So please vote yes.
Thank you. Actually, I have been convinced that it makes more sense to call on some of the people in the queue to get some of the questions answered, because all of the people who are lined up to speak in advance are speaking in favor of the article, and it will be helpful to get some questions answered and perhaps some different viewpoints. So I am now going to go to, I have no idea who thinks what on this list, Susan Daly, who says she has a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Moderator. Susan Helms Daly, Precinct 1. First, I applaud the ZIAB and their creative problem solving in the face of this existential crisis. And Jesse Gray in particular, whose explanations on the listserv and on other email chains this week have been enlightening and compelling and granular in detail. My question is whether the proposed spot pricing that could offer lower prices for electricity for things like charging your EV in the wee hours, would that result in turn in higher prices for the rest of the customer base? And I know you've touched on that already, Jesse, but I just want to hear it in sort of black and white terms, like in this first step, when EVs will be paying a lower rate for electricity, how does that not result in a higher rate for others?
Right. So what we want to avoid is what happened in Texas, where retail consumers were basically paying the spot rate, and they're at times when electricity was scarce, they were paying insane amounts of money for electricity, tens of thousands of dollars. People had bills. So we have engineered this in a way that the way it would work is there would be an across the board increase, and there's a cap on that, which is quite high. The cap on that is 13 cents. But the way that it would start is that we would raise the price by about a cent, something very small, for everyone across the board. And then we would offer steep discounts for using electricity at off-peak times. And very few people initially would be taking advantage of that. So the amount of price raise across the board that would be needed to support that would be very small. And then we would have to have, a lot of conversation and a lot of community input about exactly how to do that in the most equitable way. There's inequitable ways of managing rates, and there's equitable ways. But the basic idea is to get people ingrained in a new pattern of charging their cars at night and paying a little bit less for electricity. And that incentive could start out really strong and cost very little, and it could end up weaker later and end up costing a little more if everyone was doing it.
Okay, next, have Mr. Van Scoyoc. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm in complete agreement, excuse me, with the generous words that have been said about Jesse. You know,
Who are you?
and I apologize, John Van Scoik, Vice Chair of the Select Board. There will always be questions to be asked, and that's a good thing. I'm glad to hear all these questions. I'm kind of known for being a person who asks a lot of questions to the point of almost becoming annoying about it. So let's welcome all the questions that are being asked, but let's also recognize that Jesse has answered every single one of them in particular and to the point, and maybe his answer didn't completely satisfy a questioner now and then, or maybe his answer led to another question. But we are at the first step in a process. There's going to be questions at every step of the process. And we can't and we shouldn't expect them all to be answered in this first step of the process, but we should get as many of them answered as we can. So thank you, Jesse. I was asked this morning by someone who agrees with me that we should be adopting these articles, Article 23 and the others. Did I fear that the tide was turning because of the questions that sort of piled up last night? And I said, no, I do not fear that, because I think I know Brookline. I hope I'm right about this. We'll find out later when the vote is taken. And then I turned to the town meeting member listserv and I read comments like this, which I found so encouraging. Here's the first one. We must start the process now. We need to seek permission from the state before enacting many of these measures, and it could take years before they take effect. We are already very late to start turning this ship around. Hopefully not too late. Here's another one. My constituents tell me there is no greater threat to our community than climate change. If I believe that, which I do, then I must vote for the boldest action available. Today, we have a choice between action and no action. The cost of doing nothing is too high. I'm therefore enthusiastically supporting all the ZAB articles. Here's another one. I trust the petitioners who brought us out in front on fossil fuel free, and I trust town meeting a year or two from now to come up with an action plan that's fair and doable and hopefully will help those to whom a 2 cent per kilowatt or whatever is decided would be a burden. And I'm just going to read
Could
one.
you please finish
How much
up,
time
Mr.
do I have?
Winstead?
How much time do I have?
Well, you ran out, but I'll give you 30 more
Okay,
seconds.
allow me a finish, if you will. I'll finish with my own words.
Okay.
I was paying a lot of attention the last few days to the COP27 conference. This is a global moment. Brookline has a chance to be a part of making change happen at the local level, which then becomes change at the state level, which then becomes change at the national level, which then becomes change at the global level. It's a big moment. We have an excellent advocate in front of us who has done a better job than I can think almost anyone else would have been able to do under the circumstances. And I hope we take advantage of this moment and give to the world the result that will make us all proud of the vote we took tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, John Harris.
Yes, hello. John Harris, Precinct 8. And also, I was a member of the BGE working team that advised on a couple of contract renewals and have been on the 100% green BGE tier for years, possibly since the program began. So I'm a firm believer in BGE. Warrant Article 23 requests authorization to oppose a tax on Brookline Green electricity customers, but not customers of any other supplier, many or most of which use fossil fuels to generate their electricity. The State Department of Public Utilities has extensive authority regarding electricity rate setting, et cetera, and is presumably subject to regulation by the Massachusetts legislature. So a specific two-part question. First, I'd like to ask someone with specific familiarity or experience with state home rule procedures and or with applicable electricity regulations, such as perhaps Representative Vitolo, Scott Englander, or maybe Lee Selwyn. Is there any legal or administrative reason why the article could not have been written to impose that tax on all Brookline electricity customers in the home rule petition? And second part, once we get an answer from our administrative expert, I guess I'd say, is if it is possible to do that, I would like to ask the petitioners why they did not do that. Thank you.
Mr. Vitolo, you're first on the hot seat, and then we'll see if you want to hand it off to somebody else.
Tommy Vitolo, State Representative, Town Meeting Member at Large. The state legislature has a remarkable breadth in its powers. It can do just about anything that's not prohibited by the US Constitution, US law, or state constitution, which means that, yes, theoretically, a home rule that called to tax all electric ratepayers could pass. On the other hand, the town has a clear and specific relationship with community choice aggregation customers. It does not have that same kind of a relationship with other customers. As you heard, the town has a clear incentive to be thoughtful about the total rate for community choice aggregation customers because they can leave. It frankly does not have that same kind of an incentive for customers of basic service, the electric company, or other third-party goers. And so again, while the state has the authority, I believe, to do it, I think it would view, at least some of my colleagues would view the proposal a bit differently if it had been broadened in that way. Just a speculation on my part, though.
Mr. Gray, would you like to add anything to answer the issue of why you did not do what Mr. Harris asked?
Yes. Lawyers don't like to be creative, is what I'm told. I'm not a lawyer. And so, lawyers, when you ask them to draft legislation, or if you go up to Beacon Hill and you ask about an idea, if it resembles something that is already familiar, that is already in law, it has a much higher chance of success. We have existing community choice aggregation authority. We are successfully running a program. And so it is a relatively modest extension of that to do this. And that is the reason that we approached it that way. We also considered, by the way, municipalization, which a lot of people are advocates of, just take the whole electrical utility into the hands of the town, which would have been much more radical and which is frankly a political nightmare to try to accomplish. So I've now laid out the entire spectrum. The question was about something somewhere in between.
And Mr. Harris, did you have a second question? I do want to note that, Mr. Gray, you have insulted everyone on the podium, but moving on, i.e. lawyers. But Mr. Harris, did you have a second point? No. Okay. Then Mr. A1 Wong, you had a question?
Hello, my name is A1 Wang. Thank you, moderator, for me to speak. I'm in precinct 8. So my question is currently, before the meeting, I sent everybody an email. That's my personal a bill from Brookline Green. So that information is for 1,100 square feet condo on the 4th floor, 2 adults, 2 kids. And we use electric HVAC, electric stove, electric heat tank. So our building is 100% electrified since 1983. No gas, no oil. And I select 100% green energy from Brookline Green. So I pay the total premium, and the heat tank is replaced in 2017, HVAC is in 2018, window replacement is 2019. So I assume this will be the goal from the petitioner, right? So 100% green, and then everything is electrified. So I send you guys, everybody, email. So based on the warrant article 23, if we add in the maximum for 15 cents, the additional charge would be for this kind of a family would be additional $1,300, which is 54% more than additional, because for this type of house is electrified. So if you're adding additional like a charge on electricity, it pretty much we penalize if you're doing the 100% green. If it's adding just 2 cents, that would be around additional 7% more, which is $173. So in warrant article 26, I assume if for 1,000 square feet, the fuel charge may be around $100 a month. I have no information, so that's my assumption. So for the whole year, times 12 times 25%, that would be $300. So I think the incentive wise would be difficult for people. People might be willing just paying for $300 for the surcharge penalty instead of convert everything to green. So I think there's some modification might be required to provide more incentive. Also, warrant article 26 and 23 should pass at the same time, because if only 23 passed and 26 failed to pass, then we kind of tell people don't do it, because if you do it, you pay more. So I think that would be something I would like to suggest is maybe Jason, my question is for JC, maybe will you guys maybe consider, instead of just adding 2 cents more for AV's level of the green energy, right? Right now for the basic, it's only everybody charge 2 cents. So for me, I think I pretty much 100% fulfill what you want everybody to fulfill, right? And then I have to pay more for what? If I already reaching the goal, then why should I pay more for that? So I think that would be, if we kind of just leverage it again, and then pushing people for the green energy. And if you are electrified, and then you will have a more carrot you can eat, then I think there will be more trend to move people. So for me, as you can see, I already done my part, and this is so important. And what Mr. Warren said, it's very expensive. It's more expensive if we don't do anything. Right now, the climate change not only impact for ourselves, it's impact everywhere, and the land won't be able to be used. So I urge people to support all these warrant articles, but I think this warrant article might also need to tweak, because all of them need to pass instead of separate into individual, and then that would be create a bad situation. If one pass, the other fail, it kind of creates a even worse situation. So that's a question for Jace, maybe you have some idea or something, maybe you can help to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, first of all, didn't mean to insult lawyers. That's just what lawyers have told me. So I take it back if I'm wrong. And then, yes, thank you for the support and the question and your suggestion of a tweak. And thank you for electrifying. I wasn't clear if you're on a heat pump or resistance heat, and that will make a big difference. If you're on resistance heat, it will cost about at least three times more. So hopefully you're on a heat pump. And if not, then we'd like to help you get on a heat pump. But yes, I mean and I have to say I didn't quite follow all the numbers, but the 2 cents it's around the 7% that you were referencing, and it is designed to help participants in the program lower costs in the long term. And I'll give you an example that would benefit you, is that the town of Acton is building on a brownfield, they're building a solar production facility. And they're waiting for the DPU to approve it, because again, the DPU is taking 2 to 3 years to approve CCA requests. But the idea is that it will reduce the rates that customers will pay. So sometimes you have to spend a little money to make a little money, but I do hear your point, and we have to be very careful that we're not making it cost prohibitive to electrify, and that's something that's very important, and I am very committed to.
Thank you. There's a motion to call the question, but there are 25 people in line who wish to speak in addition to those who have already signed up, which indicates to me that there are still some unanswered questions or gray areas that need to be explored. So I am going to deny the motion to call the question. I'm not going to allow it. Next, we have Perry Grossman, or P. Grossman, I think it's Perry. Okay.
Hi there, Perry Grossman, town meeting member, precinct 5. We have a climate crisis caused by our use of fossil fuels. We need to electrify everything. And with that, we need to move electrical usage to off-peak hours as much as possible. Warrant Article 23 would give us the flexibility to do that, to create rate structures that incentivize off-peak electricity consumption, such as nighttime EV charging, or rates that disincentivize consumption during peak consumption times. Individual utilities have developed such time of use pricing, but Hawaii recently became the first state to institute time of pricing across the state. Other entities are leading on time of use electricity pricing. Brookline should also do this as well, helping to move forward advanced grid usage. Warrant Article 23 would also authorize a per kilowatt hour tax of up to 2 cents per kilowatt hour for Brookline green electricity customers, BGE customers. And this would be used to fund town solar or electrical storage projects or programs to help promote the adoption of building electrification in both new and existing buildings. The BGE rates are reasonable compared to Eversource, and we benefit from having 2-year BGE contracts rather than having utility rates that can change every 6 months. Eversource rates just went up and could go up in another 6 months. Activists across the world are taking dramatic actions to call attention to the climate crisis. It is not too much to ask Brookline to move forward with modest steps such as those in Warrant Article 23. Thank you. Please support Article 23.
Thank you. Mr. Spritz, I don't know why Mr. Harris's name is up again, but Mr. Harris, you would, okay, we're taking you off. But Mr. Spritz, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And I also miss Bobby Nabel. That's a horrible loss. And just to start, because everybody else is saying this, I'm also 100% green energy customer. And but I didn't do it because I wanted 100% green energy for my home. I did it because there's a promise that the extra money that we fund helps to build more capacity into the grid. So it was a long-term thing for me. But I do have a question here. Yesterday, we talked about some of the shortcomings that exist in the current technology for actually measuring peak demand. And Mr. Gray, and I forwarded this question to him earlier today. Mr. Gray talked about the fact that if we wanted to charge electric cars, which I don't have one, but if we wanted to charge electric cars, the electric car chargers could communicate back with someone, presumably the distribution company, so that we could get rebates later on for doing high demand work. through this sort of smart device. And I'm truly concerned about over monitoring and a loss of privacy and collection of personal data. So I'm hoping that there's some way, and Mr. Gray indicated in an email earlier to me today, that there's some way that we can do peak demand and actually electricity demand reduction without needing to collect lots of personally identifiable information and potentially just have more and more invasive privacy issues. So could you please expound upon that, Mr. Gray?
Yeah, I don't have, I think it's a great question. I don't have all the answers. Obviously, in order to get a discount, there does need to be some measurement of when your electricity use is. On the more invasive side, that may involve monitoring individual appliances, such as your car, your hot water heater, your dryer, and any other appliance potentially. That would be an invasive way to do it, and to have non-de-identified information. Less detail of the smart meter without any knowledge of individual appliances inside your home. And I think that as we start thinking about how to implement these programs, these will be very important questions. And if there's a way of offering reduced demand discounts while protecting privacy to a maximal extent, I would support it, and I'm interested in figuring out how to do it.
Okay, thank you. Chi-Chi Wu, you have a comment. You're limited to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Chi-Chi Wu, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 7, slightly under the weather, so forgive the voice. I had a question for Mr. Gray, but before I asked, I wanted to commend him on his ability to thoughtfully answer all of these questions that are being lobbed at him in deep technical expertise and with patience. I think as a result of this, I am inclined to support all of these warrant articles. But I do have a question. As some of the other town meeting members know, I am generally skeptical of climate measures that rely on individual action and personal responsibility. I think it's a distraction from the larger causes of climate change, which has to do with big corporations. 70% of emissions are due to 100 corporations. So what does all this effort and all this money do to really reduce climate change when maybe we should be focusing on these big corporations? And so I've actually written a piece as to why I should not swap out my gas stove, which I guess is a thing. And maybe to bring it back to Article 23, I have not signed up for Brookline Green. Although, to be honest, I didn't realize it was cheaper than Eversource, which might refute this idea of price insensitivity. I think I'm going to go change now. So my question is, how do you respond to a skeptic like myself, who doesn't think individual actions will really do it to combat climate change?
Right. I think that's a great question. And I do think a lot of responsibility for the situation we're in has to fall squarely on big oil and big utilities. And if we could make them solve this problem, I would sign up for that. One of the reasons that local action is so effective compared to state action, which itself is more effective than federal action in many ways, is that you have the influence of money on politics rising at every level of government. So there's the most influence at the federal level, there's a lot of influence at the state level, and there's almost no influence of money in the town of Brookline, especially in town meeting. What we're trying to do here is, in a sense, starve the beast, because if we can reduce the demand for the products that these companies are selling, if we can reduce demand for gasoline and for natural gas, we will be weakening these corporate institutions, and we will be making them more vulnerable to the political pressure that is simultaneously being applied at state and federal levels. But they remain strong. And so part of this is a strategy to starve the beast, but another part of it is that we can't electrify homes without the participation of the homeowner. There's just no way around that. So I don't believe in just asking people to do the right thing. That's why we started with a gas ban. That's not a voluntary personal action type of policy. And eventually the day will come when we will need to ban natural gas appliances. It'll need to be true that just like you won't be able to go out and buy a gasoline car in 2035 in Massachusetts, there needs to be a date where you won't be able to go out and buy a gas stove. But that day has not yet come because that would be too big of an imposition on property owners and other appliance purchasers. And I do want to protect them. We can't be too radical about this transition. We have to do it in a practical way. I hope that addresses your question.
Okay. Brenda Hochberg. Oh, I'm sorry, I have the wrong list. Mr. Bruce. Or Ms. Bruce. Town meeting member Bruce. Oh, Stephanie, okay. I can't hear you, Tanisha. Oh, okay. Then town meeting member Klein. No, they're not a town meeting member, sorry. Okay. Okay, Mr. Klein.
Thank you. I apologize. I've been in another meeting and I'm just joining, so I will pass because I just joined the proceedings and I don't know where you are.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sandman.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Mike Sandman, Select Board, speaking for myself. A lot of the discussion here has been on very specific questions about Article 23. I do want to talk about something that was mentioned last night quite a lot about Article 23 and for that matter, some of the others, but specifically to speak to Article 23. There's been some discussion about how, well, what does up to mean? And why would we not set a specific number? And that's true in, as they say, in some of the other articles. And I want to point out to you that this is not the first time by any means that we've been asked to send forward a home rule petition that didn't have specific numbers, but rather had a range in order to give the town enough flexibility to accomplish what the mission that it's intending and try to balance all of the various interests in that. And so the specific example I would give you is from November 2020, we established a means-tested senior citizen property tax exemption. It passed with 183 votes. Even though the details were not set, the amount cited was anywhere from how much it would cost. The amount cited was anywhere from $500,000 to $2 million. And of course, that money would have been distributed among the rest of us who pay for that. And the exact value was to be set by the select board. And that's a factor of 4 actually across, that's a big range. It also didn't specify who would really be eligible. It said that people couldn't have excessive assets, whatever that is. And so there was a lot left open. It is asking the legislature to give us authority. And really that's what we're asking for here. So it's really probably not very sensible to assume that the rate would go up by 15 cents a kilowatt instantaneously. And it's probably sensible to say that we don't really know if 15 cents ultimately is a possibility. It might never get to that point. It really does depend on listening to voters, balancing off the various things that we're trying to do, and a flexible home rule petition of this sort is actually advantageous versus one that locks us in. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Okay. There's been a request to call the question if everyone is in favor. and to ID who is for and against, but I cannot do that because the people online mostly have questions. So the people who are, so I'm not going to call the question. I fully understand the feeling behind it, but we still have 23 people who have questions, which indicates to me that there are still a lot of questions that people have. So I think it's unfair to say that the people who have questions are against, but I am trying to focus on those people and then go back to the supporters. Jeffrey Benson, question for petitioners.
Hi, thank you, Madam Moderator. It's Jeffrey Benson, Precinct 3. I've been thinking a lot back to the other night when the kids from Driscoll put together that film urging us to save trees as a path to saving their future and asking us to do something because they're the ones who are going to face the consequences of our action or inaction, and how happy everyone was and smiling watching those kids asking us to save a few trees. And I'm wondering if the petitioners can speak in any fashion, if warrant Article 23 passes, and I know it's part of a package, how many trees for those kids' futures are we saving? How many pounds of carbon won't be back into the atmosphere if we go to electric, more electric? What are we really, what is this promising the kids in the future? Since we're investing, we have such an investment in them. What will our nickels and dimes and dollars and tens of dollars give them in terms of a better future?
Mr. Gray, do you want to answer that, or would you want to kick that over to somebody?
Sure, I'll take that one, although I've gotten a lot of credit here tonight, and I do want to mention that I'm just one member of an incredibly talented team. Thank you for the question. One thing that troubles me a little, although trees are a very worthy cause and they're very important, but to solve the problem of climate, we have to focus on reducing emissions as much as we can. And trees play a part in that, there's no doubt. But what plays a much bigger part is the emissions from our buildings and our transportation. And that is why the Zero Emissions Advisory Board has focused on that. It's absolutely helpful and complementary to be protecting trees. But I would say I wish that more school children were focused on the bigger decarbonization challenges in some ways. Whatever gets them excited, whatever gets them involved is great. Trees are very important, but the biggest emissions challenge we face in Brookline is buildings and cars. So that's how we can help them most.
Linda Pelkey.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Linda Olson-Pelkey, Precinct 17. I have a general request for the petitioners that I will voice secondly, but I have a specific question which has been partially answered, but about Article 23, I'm trying to understand why we need permission from the legislature to do anything because we already have community choice aggregation. And I would like to know specifically if the ask is to either or both legalize demand charging, or is it to legalize us pocketing a surcharge as a municipality? And if you want to answer that, then you have to come back to me because I do have a general ask for all the articles. Moderator, I don't know how you want me to handle that.
If you have a general ask about all the articles, we are going to pass on that right now.
Well, okay, then let me ask about this one. Okay, I will, but I'm going to ask the same question for each article. So here's my question. We have heard many times in the presentation of these articles that we will be able to iron out the details later. And I think for my own self, I need to know specifics in terms of even the language in the article. But for instance, I asked this question about 23 today of the petitioners. When, where, and how do we participate in decision-making around a positively voted home rule petition as a 23 is outlined? And the answer I received was that it would be the select board would make that decision. So I want my fellow town meeting members to focus on the nuance of that in terms of all of these articles, because they're all different. They're not all going to come back to town meeting. Select board member Sandman mentioned the voters. The voters aren't going to have a say in this. So please think about that as we progress. What do you think the right level of involvement and assent in our population is for these? For myself personally, I think some of them would be requiring a townwide vote, and I wouldn't feel comfortable voting these things as town meeting. So in this case, the answer is the select board. And I would like you to think about trying to answer that much more specifically as we go forward. So the first question was.
Wait, we lost you. Hold on. Okay, you're back.
Thank you. Why do we need legislative authorization for a community choice? What aspect of this are we seeking a change in law about?
Jesse, is that for you or Tommy?
I can take that. In theory, the community choice aggregation programs have a little bit more power than they have in practice, because they can propose a large number of different kinds of things, but they have to propose it to the Department of Public Utilities. And literally, the Department of Public Utilities is taking 2 or 3 years before providing any response. And that's very problematic because these programs are on a contract that only lasts for about that long. So if you're trying to establish a new plan and you want to add something, it's very problematic. So that's one of the things that also needs to be fixed. But in addition, the DPU is rejecting a lot of requests for programmatic changes to community choice aggregation. So the bottom line is that this is needed as a legislative request because the Department of Public Utilities is not allowing it and is not processing it in an efficient enough manner for it to actually happen.
Okay, there's been a motion to call the question. I'm going to take a couple of more questions and then I will allow a motion. Susie Roberts.
Thank you. And sorry, I'm chewing because I didn't think I was going to get called on, but I did have a question for Jesse. And, excuse me.
Introduce
An
yourself once you
observation.
finish chewing.
Okay, I'm done. Sorry about that, everyone. With regard to Article 2, I guess before I go there, I do hope that we're going to be able to get to the people who have questions as opposed to the people who are saying, talking more about our climate change emergency, because we all know that at this point. And I'm really hoping that we're going to be able to finish all of these articles tonight. So in terms of my question, I'm wondering about the sharing of this money that will be used for, solar canopies and charging stations and so forth, and why it is that the people who are already trying to be green, and especially those who are 100% green, I'm also one of those, that the burden is falling on us more. And I'm wondering, how else we can raise this money. I'm not seeing that. Do we raise parking meter rates? Do we raise, parking rates generally? Do we do everything? I mean, if you walk into town hall, should you have to pay $1 or something, and this money goes to, fund our climate, responses, our funds to be paid to address the climate crisis. And I'm just wondering, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing that, this particular article is already burdening those of us who already are green. And, for me, I'm wondering, maybe I should drop down, and I don't think that's the response that you're looking for, but it is getting so expensive. That's what I'm sort of saying. And I'm not feeling that there's equity throughout the town in terms of the price, where these funds are going to come, since obviously what we're doing is going to benefit the entire town, yet the burden here is on, the people who already have been demonstrating that they are green and want to be. So I'm wondering, and by the way, I have to say too, I think lawyers are creative, and and we do freaking think about this a lot. How the heck can you use a law to get you where you want to go? And, I actually do believe and feel like, press harder, with regard to laws, or if you want to do, Eversource customers or whatever you want to do, press harder. That's how I sort of look at this, and just wonder if there has been a way to more equitably throughout the town get this money.
Okay, I'm actually going to call on Nancy Heller, and then I will take a motion to call the vote or call the question.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Nancy Heller, Town Meeting Member Precinct 8. My question has to do with community aggregation, and it follows up on Susie Roberts and also Nathan Spritz's argument that the people who are all green are really bearing much of the burden here, which I don't mind in certain circumstances, but I don't see that in the next contract, and I'm a little worried about it. When we first adopted Brookline Green, and many of us, at least 500 of us, went to all green, partially because we wanted to expand renewable energy in the state, and we understood that we were paying more really than 100%, but also because we knew that we had a high quality vendor in Green Energy Consumer Alliance, in terms of the quality of the RECs and their being local, and it was a nonprofit who really plowed the investment back into additional renewables. I don't see that in the new contract, and I'm concerned about that because I do think, as Susie and Nathan have expressed, it seems to me to this idea of the 2 cents on everyone without it being on people who use just electricity from Eversource. Why shouldn't they share the burden of renewables too? They should. Why shouldn't they share the burden? They're going to benefit. It should be something that the entire town pays attention to. But at any rate, going back to Green Energy Consumer Alliance, is that part of Next Era or whatever this new contract, this new supplier is?
Is that a question for Jesse?
I believe so.
I can't hear.
I believe it is a question for whoever negotiated this new contract, and who is the supplier of the renewable energy is what I'm asking. I couldn't find it on BrooklineGreenElectricity.com.
Yeah, it's Green Energy Consumers, and
it's still going to be Green Energy Consumers.
Yes. I mean, I think there's a little bit of a misconception here. One of the things that I would say is not worked out is who would pay the extra 2 cents. I think it could be applied to everyone, which was my original thought. I think though, we could also create a choice, a category where people opt up to pay the 2 extra cents. I think that could be potentially another option. So I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves in terms of getting into that level of detail. But I will say that earlier it was suggested that most people were on the cheapest plan, but actually roughly 90 to 95% of people in Brookline who have electricity are on the default plan. So 90 to 95% of people simply just haven't changed their plan, and they are participants in Brookline Green at the default plan, because most people don't make a change.
Okay, there's a motion to call the question by Mr. Sandman. Do I have a second? Susan Daly has seconded that motion. This has to pass by 2/3 vote. Ready? Let's go. Oh, I'm sorry, stop. I have to read who's waiting. Yeah, I apologize. My continuing Achilles heel as moderator. The people who are waiting to speak: Stephanie Bruce, Mendel, Nangle, Jeffrey Benson, Lee Birnbaum, Jennifer Goldsmith, Eric Hyatt, David Lowe, Connor Sheehan, Charles Homer, David Perlman, Rebecca Mountner, Wendy Friedman, John Hebert, Ariel Maddox, Kimberly Loscalzo, Alec Lebovitz, Michael Berger, Regina Frawley, Wadner Oji, Martin Yassine, Sasan Zelka, and Jesse Hefter. And what? Oh, Ms. Feldberg. All right, now we will drop the vote.
We got 175 yes, 49 no, 15 abstentions.
Okay, the motion carries with 175 yes, 49 no, 15 abstentions. We will now vote on the main motion, which is whether or not to amend Brookline's Community Choice Aggregation Plan, which includes, among other things, allowing an increase of up to 2 cents per kilowatt hour. We can start the vote now. Main motion of 23, yes, which is found on 23.4 to 23.5. I apologize for not mentioning that sooner. Okay. What vote was that?
We have 178 yes, 49 no, 15 abstentions. 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 15
55 no, 14
Okay, the motion passes with 178 yes, 55 no, and 14 abstentions. I understand that Mr. Hebert has a point of order to make relating to the motion to call the question.
Yes, thank you. I just did the math. I just want to make sure that that it is correct. My understanding that on the vote taken on the motion that the yeses were 175, that the noes were 49, and that the abstentions were 50. Is that correct?
15.
Oh, 15. All right.
And when calculating 2/3, you only count the people who vote, so the abstentions are irrelevant. The only numbers that you analyze the percentages with are the actual voters.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right. How about a 5-minute break or even a 7-minute? We're back. Okay, welcome back. We are now going to move on to Article 21. Article 21 is found on page 21-6 to 21-7. It is a home rule petition to create a betterment loan to fund residential electrification, brought by Jesse Gray, seconded by Jocelyn Murphy. Jesse Gray is going to be the first speaker on this, and Mr. Gray, you have a hard 5 minutes to talk. Oh, God, okay. Ms. Stahl, you have 5 minutes to talk.
Thank you. We've got some slides. Warrant Article 21 provides low interest loans for home.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Could you introduce yourself?
Yes. My name is Wendy Stahl. I'm on the Zero Emissions Advisory Board, not a town meeting member. Warrant Article 21 provides for low interest loans for home electrification. It is a home rule petition. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk tonight about what Warrant Article 21 provides, why we need it, what exactly are betterments in the first place, and go over some simple questions that we've received and what the next steps are. I also want to tell everybody that it wasn't supposed to be me presenting this. It was supposed to be another Zero Emissions Advisory Board member, Calvin Thompson, who is unfortunately busy at this hour. So you should have seen a new face right now, but it's me. Next slide. What is Warrant Article 21? Well, it asked the legislature for permission to establish a low-interest municipal loan program for property owners who are trying to transition off fossil fuels. We're proposing it because truly there aren't enough funding mechanisms to help Brookline property owners electrify their properties, as we've been talking about for the last 2 nights now. Next slide. The Mass Save rebate program does have a zero interest loan that they offer, but it only goes up to $25,000. That sounds like a lot, but the cost of electrification are actually usually more than $20 per square foot. So for a 2,000 square foot home, that would be at least $40,000. Leaving you with this gap, you see, of $15,000 for the homeowner to foot on their own after having utilized that zero interest Mass Save loan. Warrant Article 21 is really great because it would allow residents to get loans at a lower rate than through private lenders, because the town can get loans at a lower rate than through private lenders. And they would forward those savings onto the residents. Next slide, please. What is a betterment? Well, a betterment is a special property tax that is permitted by law for an item that is a public improvement, and also where a property receives a special benefit or advantage other than just the general advantage to the community. So that means gobbledygook to a lot of people, but this is modeled, our Warrant Article 21 betterment program is modeled on an existing septic betterment loan program in the state of Massachusetts that municipalities can opt into, that provides low interest loans to upgrade your septic systems or to transition onto a sewage system. Next slide, please. We've gotten some questions about this. So can the town really do this? Yes. Massachusetts towns have been doing this with the septic betterment program for decades. If this passes in town meeting, what happens next? That's the big question we've been hearing over and over again. Well, this is a home rule petition. The legislature, so if we pass it tonight, the legislature will review it during their 2-year session, and they'll hopefully come to a decision by the end of June 2024. If they approve it, the select board would establish regulations following a public hearing. Now, the question is, where would the money come from? This will be determined after we get permission. It could come from municipal bonds, state bonds, tax levy, ARPA funds, or really any other funding mechanism that the town can work with. Who determines who's selected for loans? Well, anyone who can apply, who pays property taxes, and who meets the program requirements would be able to participate. And how would this interact with mortgages? Well, Article 21 doesn't itself describe how any program would be implemented or how any priorities would be assigned. So this article would only grant authority to the town to develop a program to figure that out. Next slide. Oh, that's the end. That was quick.
Okay, thank you very much. I like that. Okay, Mr. Seufer, Ms. Seufer.
Good evening. My name is Ariel Seufer, and I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 2. I am a partner at a major law firm, Wilmer Hale. My firm has represented both fossil fuel interests and renewable energy interests. For example, my partner, Jamie Gorelick, negotiated regarding the Deepwater Horizon settlement with President Barack Obama. I have mostly, but not exclusively, represented renewable energy interests. I'm not speaking on behalf of my firm, any of my partners, or any client of my firm, nor am I providing an opinion of the firm or a legal opinion. I provide this information by way of conflict of interest disclosure. This evening, I will discuss 1, costs of electric residential home heating are high and are increasing dramatically. 2, a subsidized loan program for electrification subsidizes individuals with the greatest means. And 3, the town would issue bonds that could create payment timing issues and potential for certain legal issues. First, the costs of electric home heating are high and are increasing dramatically. According to the Massachusetts Department of Energy, costs of heating houses are expected to be 28.6% higher for natural gas heating and 54.6% higher for electric heating this winter compared to last winter. The Massachusetts Department of Energy estimates natural gas heating will average $1,081 for this winter, based on an average 1,814 square foot home, and electric heating will average $1,262 for winter, based on an average 1,272 square foot home. On a normalized per square foot basis, then these estimates would result in about $1,800 in costs for electric heating using the average home size for a natural gas heated home, or about 67% more than the average for a natural gas heated home. Second, a subsidized loan program for electrification subsidizes those with the greatest means, amounting to welfare for the rich. Only those households that can afford an additional monthly payment for electrification at these higher rates that were just described would be able to consider these subsidized loans and would also be able to consider their loan payments. Those least able to afford electrification, therefore, would necessarily be excluded. In addition, Section 5 of this warrant article provides for a lien without specifying whether the lien is on the whole property or the electrification improvement, as well as personal liability of the owner until conveyance of the property. This vagueness means, the vagueness of this lien, without stating as to what the lien is on, means that in the case of non-payment, the town would be able to proceed against an individual for the individual's home, the individual's electrification improvement, which is costly to remove and likely replace an existing system so that there is no, for example, backup heating system, or the individual directly. Wealthier individuals may be able to make payments on these loans, but more marginal individuals that fail to make payments would end up losing their homes, having their electrification improvement removed, which in the case of a heating system could result in extraordinary harm, especially in winter, or being personally liable, depending on how the town chooses to proceed against them. This subsidy could be particularly costly for more marginalized individuals that do not fully understand the implications of these subsidies. Third, the town would issue the money immediately, but only receive repayment over many years. While Section 6 provides funding may come from appropriations or bonds, we all understand that available appropriations are limited, given the town's financial situation, and bonding is more likely. Is the intent that these bonds would be put to a vote at the town on each occasion? Has there been a legal analysis on whether town-issued bonds that are issued for loans for the benefit of private individuals qualify as tax-exempt bonds? I've reached out to the town council on this latter point, and I've not heard back yet. Although to be fair, they have not had a lot of time to consider that question. For these foregoing reasons, the high and dramatic costs of electrification, the subsidy that really subsidizes those that least need it, and harms those potentially most marginalized and of the least potential to understand what they are signing up for, and the potential for the town to for repeated votes on bonding, for the town to lose tax exempt status of these bonds, and other potential harms. I urge you to vote against warrant article 21. Thank you.
Mr. Seufert, did you actually want to ask council for an answer to the question you had posed?
I did send a note to town council for that, but I'm not sure if they've had time to review it. If not,
They are available. Mr. Moreski or Mr. Simpson, are you here and are you able to answer that question now?
This is Jonathan Simpson, Associate Town Council. I would actually like John Moreski, the new First Assistant Town Council, to take this question. So John, they'll just unmute you in a second.
Thank you, Jonathan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Seufert. We have begun looking into it, but unfortunately we don't have anything definitive yet. I can say it's a possibility that it would be subject to tax, but I can't say anything definitively until we've had a chance to sit with it a little bit more, discuss it internally, and potentially talk to bond counsel.
Thank you.
I do appreciate your patience.
Kelly Hardebeck.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good evening, town meeting. I'm Kelly Hardebeck, town meeting member from Precinct 7 and speaking for the advisory committee tonight. As you heard, warrant article 21 is a home rule petition to authorize the town to establish and administer low interest loans for qualifying homeowners seeking to transition their homes from fossil fuel energy sources to electricity. Article 21 is intended to incentivize this transition by offering these low interest loans for electrification, and loan repayment would be the responsibility of the property owner. And it's important to note that that would also transfer to the new owner if the property were sold. Again, as you heard earlier this evening, this article is modeled on the statewide septic tank betterment program that helps homeowners fund either septic tank repairs or a connection to a townwide sewer system. During its hearing, the advisory committee had many questions about the length, amount of loans, and the interest rate that would be charged, and how the program would be administered. And I'm sure town meeting has similar questions. But it's important to note that this article is enabling legislation, and the implementation of the program will only take place after the select board drafts regulations and approves them following a public hearing. The advisory committee also discussed the need for funding for energy efficiency efforts, as those also reduce greenhouse gases, and amended the article to expand the program to include energy efficiency measures. So by a vote of 15 to 10 to 1, a divided advisory committee recommends favorable action on warrant article 21 as amended. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Margolis, you have a question? Identify yourself, please.
John Margolis, Precinct 7 and Library Trustee. I have a question, a comment and a question, I think. One is, I would note that the betterment loans will be first priority, which means that anyone who has a mortgage, a standard mortgage, would either need to get permission from the mortgagee or would be in violation of the mortgage, which is going to greatly restrict the number of people who can apply or obtain a betterment loan. Perhaps more to the point, I noticed that one of the slides that Ms. Stahl showed suggested that anyone who did apply for a betterment would get it. And yet I noticed that in the text of the article, it provides that the decision whether or not to extend a loan under the program would not be within the jurisdiction of a court. As a lawyer, and particularly a trial lawyer, I am deeply suspicious of any provision that says you can't get court review. Perhaps town council or someone from ZIAB can disabuse me of the notion that that's what this says, but that's what the language looks like to me.
Mr. Mareshi, could you address that issue?
I'm sorry for the delay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, and I'm sorry my video isn't on. We talked about that briefly internally, and I know Joe had a perspective on that as well, that it wasn't as a blanket of prohibition as it may seem at first glance. Joe, I don't know if you remember that discussion. I'll try to find it.
I don't understand your answer, so.
Oh, I'm sorry for the lack of clarity. We discussed that briefly internally, and I'm just searching my notes for it. I don't have the answer immediately.
Jonathan Simpson, do you have a clearer recollection? And I don't know, Joe, if you're there.
I apologize. I was trying to take notes with what Mr. Margolis said. He'd asked about the first priority. Was this the first priority question?
I believe that the more pertinent question is whether it's true that the courts would be deprived of jurisdiction to consider whether there had been something improper in a decision, particularly to deny a loan under this program.
So what we do not believe that a blanket prohibition would ever be entirely effective, but we are still discussing exactly what how far that could go. So I apologize, I can't give you a more definitive answer now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Neil Gordon, Precinct 1 Town Meeting member of the Advisory Committee, and with Marty Rosenthal, co-chair of Brookline PACS. By way of background, I have something that rounds to half a century of finance experience, mortgage lending, municipal finance, and more included. I know a little bit about the subject matter of Article 21. Petitioners modeled their warrant article after the state septic tank betterment program, which they report has been implemented successfully in Massachusetts. I see further parallels with long-term sewer betterments, which I experienced directly living in Andover, and with our senior tax deferral program, which many of us as town meeting members are familiar with. All of those place liens on property, as do our tax bills, place liens on property. Anybody who's ever bought a home with a mortgage has a lien on their property. And guess what? If you don't pay off the debt, if you go into default, you're at risk of losing your home. That's the way it works. Let me address two significant objections to the proposed betterment loan program that are mentioned specifically in the advisory committee report. First, the notion that on already mortgaged properties, the town won't be able to obtain a first lien. Likely true for logistical rather than legal reasons, and that could substantially limit the number of potential participants in a betterment loan program, as has been mentioned. But that's also true with respect to the senior tax deferral program, which town meeting consistently supports nonetheless. Yes, if you're newer to home ownership in Brookline and you have a mortgage, you may be boxed in, but many have owned long enough to be mortgage free. Many have owned long enough to have aging systems ripe for replacement. Next is the issue of, oh no, right in the advisory committee report of how we would administer this complicated new program. Perhaps we should look at what we administer now. We individually assess thousands of properties in Brookline, single family, small multifamily, large multifamily, commercial, and more. We manage abatements and exemptions. We send out and we collect on tens of thousands of tax bills annually. There's a similar, though far less complicated system related to auto excise tax. Yes, staff time and expertise will be required to manage any new program, but it's within our capabilities, and the cost of the program will be paid for by the borrowers, same as it is with mortgage debt, home equity loans, and yes, even the senior tax deferral program. I join with Brookline PACS in support of the general objectives of the ZAB articles and in recognizing the urgency of dealing aggressively with emissions. And I join with the majority of my advisory committee colleagues in recommending a vote of favorable action on Article 21. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Harris, or John Harris, excuse me.
Yes, hi, thank you. John Harris, Precinct 8. Simply a question or a request. I would simply ask for that each of these ZAB articles, that someone with knowledge, perhaps town council, perhaps Representative Vitola, or possibly a petitioner, answer the question, if or when any of these home rule petitions are approved by the legislature, will that particular one go back to town meeting, to the select board, or to a townwide election, and why in each case? It's simply a request that that information be conveyed to us as each article comes up. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Vitolo, can you take on that responsibility, please?
Tommy Vitolo, State Representative, Town Meeting Member at Large. Madam Moderator, I cannot. The question is about the contents of the warrant article itself, not the actions of the legislature. So I will punt that along to someone with expertise of the language within the home rule petition itself.
Okay, Town Council, are you able to answer this, or do we need to rely on the petitioner? Mr. Simpson, I'm hitting you up again.
Jonathan Simpson, Associate Town Council. Mr. Harris, I can do my best, but quite frankly, there is a significant amount of discretion within any home rule petition as to how it will ultimately pass through the legislature. So anything I say would be not too far short of a guess. I can say if things, but my understanding that Jesse outlined what he believed was the breakdown that you're asking for last night. My recollection, and I believe this to be the case, is the betterment program, once passed, would not require any further action by town meeting nor a townwide referendum. It would be implemented by the select board and staff.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Mr. or Ms. Mendels?
Hi. Thank you. It's Mr. David Mendels. I am a resident in Brookline, Washington Square area. I'm not a member of town meeting. It's actually my first time here, and so thank you to all of you. It's an honor to be here. And I got to say, just to kick this off, I'm proud to be in Brookline. I got two boys just out of Brookline High, and they told me years ago, climate is the thing I need to work on, the thing I need to worry about the most for them. And Brookline's been a leader, and I'm proud to be a part of this community. The work that this body started with the fossil fuel free ban in 2019, I think this is a continuation of that, trying to solve the next set of problems. And we lit a fire. We kicked off a movement across Massachusetts. 14 cities have followed. Boston has followed. Outside of the state, New York City followed us. So thank you. Just wanted to start with that. Second, just wanted to say how I've been trying to take in and absorb all this work from the ZAB. And I think of all of these articles as tools in a toolbox. We don't have to use every tool for every house or for every homeowner, but we need tools. The work that we all agreed on, right, to get to net zero by 2040 is not going to be free. Our emissions come from buildings and transit. Lots of people have said that, transportation. We have 12,000 buildings and I don't know how many thousand cars. This is a mountain we have to climb. It's not going to be a free lunch. We can't do it without some new tools in our toolbox. And the program as a whole is a toolbox, and Warrant Article 23 is one of the very valuable tools. It might not work for every homeowner. Some people have mentioned different reasons why that's the case, but that's okay. We have 12,000 buildings to decarbonize, and we have to start somewhere, and we have to help everyone in different ways. So it's important to understand that retrofits are hard, they're complex, they can be costly. Every building is different. Costs can range pretty wildly. There are great incentives now available from both the federal government and the state government with the DRIVE Act. And there's even a Mass Save program, a 0% interest loan program up to $25,000. But there will be some buildings that need more. And that's what we're trying to address. We're trying to build a set of tools that will help us address all of these different and varied situations we have in our community so that we can actually achieve this goal that we set a target, 0 carbon by 2040, and we got to build that toolbox to get there. And this is one of those tools. Financing is one of the key issues that we're going to face. Homeowner education, program management, contractor education are all big issues too, but financing is probably the biggest one. So this is a very important bill. It doesn't have to work for everyone. It has to work for some percentage of those 12,000. And if so, it will be a big win for Brookline. And again, I'm hoping we'll inspire the state, we'll inspire the country. And I want to thank you all and ask you all to please vote for Warrant Article 23.
Thank you. Gideon Koltoff has a question. Koltoff, Coltoff, Gideon. Oh.
Hello, yes, Gideon Koltoff, Town Meeting Precinct 6. I love the idea, but I'm concerned about how the granting and administration loans impacts town staff. Can someone in town give me a sense of how the septic loans are currently administered? How many has the town granted? How many applications are received? How intensive in time and money is application review? How costly is it to go after defaults, if there are any? Yeah, so town is not a bank. I'm just concerned about how getting deeper into these waters will impact things. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, my first ball is going to toss this at Melissa Goff, and she can tell me who should properly address that.
Melissa Goff, Deputy Town Administrator. I think maybe Lincoln Heineman might be able to talk a little bit about this, but he is still fairly new, so I don't know that he is that familiar with these articles.
The question wouldn't be about the articles, it would be about the current practice of collecting the sewage betterment. I can't state the question as well as you did, Mr. Koltoff, but why don't you restate the question when Mr. Heineman is connected with us? Okay.
Hello. Hi, yes.
You're
So
unmuted.
Thank you. So again, Gideon Koltoff, Precinct 6. So the question is really in terms of trying to get a handle on this particular betterment program, trying to compare it to the one that exists on septic loans. And so I want to know like how many loans are granted, how many applications are received, how intensive in time and money is the application review, how costly is defaults. Any information you can provide to us, I think will help us all assess better what this might mean for a similar kind of program. Thank you.
Certainly. I'm sorry, Lincoln Heineman, the finance director for the town. I'm sorry, I don't have the information in front of me regarding how many applications we receive and whatnot. What I can certainly say is that any lien that the town would put on, whether it be a tax lien or a betterment of any kind, would take precedence over any kind of bank lien. But I can certainly get back to the meeting or anyone who wants that in the future with further details about the current number of applications and whatnot. But I apologize, I don't have that information in front of me at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Scanlon?
Hi, good evening. I'm Kathleen Scanlon, Town Meeting Member Precinct 3. I'm also a registered architect and ZEB member. And I'm currently working with owners to transition building types off of fossil fuels. And all I can say is that, every home is different with its own unique set of conditions. There's lots of similarities within the challenges that arise with electrification, which includes, of course, the financing. ZEAB is currently working on a set of resource guides to provide guidance on electrification. But of course, like I said, it always comes down to money when you are making decisions about replacing heating and other systems. And as Wendy mentioned, there is a gap in what it costs to take on an electrification project and the incentives and rebates available. These types of loans will help close the gap between project costs and other available incentives and rebates. And the program will provide a financial pathway for residents looking for residential electrification. And we need all residents to begin doing that, to begin to make their plan for electrification of their systems. If Brookline does not have a tool like Warrant Article 21 or something similar to help residents finance the transition off of fossil fuels, it makes the planning even more difficult or just not feasible. Without this potential tool, we could be locking in residents to decades of reliance on fossil fuels for their home and building systems if their next heating system replacement is just another gas boiler, because that's what they know, or worse yet, they're caught in a emergency situation. So I'm on board with asking for permission for Warrant Article 21 because the goal is so important and it's exactly what we need right now for our homeowners. And we have to trust that the details are going to be worked out in accordance with our community values. So please vote favorable action for Warrant Article 21. Thank you.
Thank you. John Hebert.
Thank you. John Hebert, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 7. I have a few questions, but I also have some comments. The questions I'll ask first, and then I want to get to the comments, and then perhaps we can get back to the questions. I'm curious to know if the advisory board knows how many homes are candidates for these betterments, how much money the town may have to loan and therefore underwrite, and how many personnel and at what cost it would be to administer the program, including pensions and other related costs. And moving into the comments, my concern about this article relates back to Shakespeare's comment in The Merchant of Venice, neither a lender nor a borrower be. And the town of Brookline seems to be all too good at borrowing. And I'm extremely concerned that we're going to be getting into not only borrowing, but lending as well, and having to borrow to be able to support the lending. I ask this because, and I ask the questions because to convert, I'm going through this process right now. I have a 40-year-old gas-fired boiler in my house. So it is forced hot water heat. Heat pumps work on forced air, okay? They bring in fluid, but that is converted to air and the warm air or cold air is pushed around the room. This requires a unit mounted on the outside of the house, a spider web of conduits bringing the fluids into the house, and what's known as a head in each one of the rooms to be able to do this. Each one of the heat pumps is $10,000. Each head is $5,000. My house has 10 rooms. Every room would require one of the heads. That is a cost of $120,000 minus $20,000 in rebates, bringing it down to $100,000. And I still have all of the stuff running around the outside of my house. If I want to get elegant about it, I have to do a gut renovation. You multiply my situation, if I could do it at all, and it's not really a good candidate for electrification, by 100 homes, we're talking $10 million. If it's 1,000 homes, it's $100 million. This is not a small amount of money. I have how much more time do I have, please? Regardless, there's a very important consideration, I think, in all of this, that all of these warrant articles are based on the premise that we urgently need to stop burning fossil fuels, not today, not tomorrow, but now. And it's the UN International Panel on Climate Change is quoted where it says to avoid catastrophic climate change, we must stop. Well, they're not talking about the town of Brookline or the state of Massachusetts here. In fact, China has become the top emitter of carbon emissions.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hebert, we have to be efficient
Okay,
in our
well,
time.
that's fine. Let me leave it at my great concern over this whole process. But let's, if we could focus on the questions, does the advisory board know how many houses and how much money we're talking about and what the salaries might be of people to administer this program? Thank you.
Ms. Hardebeck, you can answer, but my guess is that this is going to need to be directed towards somebody on ZEAB.
I would absolutely direct it back to ZEAB. We did not discuss salaries or program administration. I will say, though, that there is a small surcharge that's provided for in the warrant article that would support the administration of the program. The petitioners, I'm sure, will give more details about that.
Mr. Gray, do you want to handle this?
Sure, yes. As Ms. Hardebeck was referencing, there's a 2% spread that's allowed by this legislation, which is similar to the Betterments program. So in other words, you can borrow at 2%, you can borrow at 2% less than you lend at, and that funds the program. So no, we have not, I mean, in terms of the number of staff, the staff salaries, we have not gotten to that level of detail. That is a level of detail we would be getting into later. And of course, it would depend on the uptake of the program. In other words, how many people actually sign up. But in terms of the big numbers you were asking about, there's about 12,000 buildings in Brookline that we need to electrify. The cost of electrifying those buildings will be in the low billions, 1, 2, 3 billion, in that range. However, we don't expect this program to be the primary method of financing. This is one tool in the toolkit. A lot of that can come from federal and state incentives, private financing, savings from utility cost decreases, and other sources.
Okay, thank you. I received a message from Melissa Goff, and please chime in, Melissa, if I am misinterpreting this, that the town of Brookline has had no betterments in recent history.
That's correct. And that came from Rashid Bellasine, who is on the chat, and he's the one that provided me with that information.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hochberg. Brenda Hochberg. Brenda, can you unmute, please?
Thank you. Sorry, it looked like I was unmuted and it cycled through somehow. Okay, I'll start over. Brenda Hochberg, town meeting member, precinct 2. Through Mothers Out Front, some of us got an early look at the MCEP warrant articles. It was a lot to take in, new ideas and a glimpse of a path to a better future. I was very impressed with the ZEAB's expertise, hard work and dedication, and their infinite patience in helping others catch up to the vision. I support all the MCP articles and urge you to do so too. Regarding the article at hand, the town is committed to reducing its emissions. Doing so requires electrifying as many buildings as possible And Article 21 will make electrification projects more affordable. The loans will help close the gap between project costs and other available incentives. Loans enabled by Article 21 will fit in a framework already up and running across the state. Let's help Brookline build on its previous climate successes, renewable source electrical energy, and zero emissions for new buildings and major renovations. I urge you to vote in favor of warrant Article 21.
Thank you. Mark Levy has a question.
Hi, Mark Levy, town meeting member from precinct 7. I have a couple of comments as well as a question. The question, first of all, is what has the experience been in other towns to when they've done betterment loans? Is it a huge default rate or not? Now, that's I think to get into the common part is going to be up to the selectmen to find out if this passes, and they're then charged with developing the regulations for the program. The other thing I'd like to say as a comment is I've heard some people say that this is a benefit, a subsidy for certain wealthy homeowners. And I would take issue with that, because the effect is not simply to make the wealthy homeowner live in a cleaner environment and a more climate resilient environment, but for everybody in the town, and to be just slightly more prepared to deal with climate change. So those are my comments, and that was my feeble attempt to pretend it was a question. Thank you.
Mr. Gray, your name is on the list to speak. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. And if I have a conflict of interest, it's that my employer is a client of Wilmar Hale. I just want to address a few of the comments that have come up and reply to some of the questions in my time. So one thing that was referenced is that electrification has a cost, which is true, but it happens to be the only viable way for us to achieve our carbon pollution or emissions targets. So it's something that we just have to do. It's also been said that the cost of electric heat is higher, and we have to be very careful when we're talking about electric heat, because there's two kinds. There's the essentially the toaster kind, where you're generating heat directly from electricity, just like a toaster. And you often have a floorboard radiator running along the bottom of the wall. Those are incredibly expensive. And that is what was being installed for a long time historically. Heat pumps are 3 to 4 times less expensive to operate, and are at approximate cost parity with gas, and they can be lower. So it's not true that electric heat from heat pumps is more expensive. For people who are on resistance electric heat, it is more expensive, but that's not what's being installed now. Let's see, next one. In terms of all the details that need to work out, we have time to work that out. That will come in time. And in fact, we've allowed the legislature to make changes upon consulting Rep. Tommy Vitolo and Senator Cynthia Cream. So there'll be time to address some of the complexities. And even the questions about the bonds, it may not be municipal bonds that would fund this, as Wendy described. It could end up being state money or other forms of money. And finally, John Harris asked about the select board and why we chose in this case to have the select board be the body to, assuming the legislature approves this, why should the select board be the one to then take action? And the answer is that we felt that both the community choice aggregation, the previous article, and this article were relatively modest in terms of the imposition on taxpayers in the town, and therefore the select board could efficiently take care of that. Whereas in the cases where we were raising taxes, as with Articles 26, 28, and 29. We wanted those to go either to town meeting or the voters.
Okay, thank you. There is a motion to call the question by Mr. Sandman. Do we have a second? And then I will tell you who is waiting in line. Is there a second? I'm told there is. Amy Hummel. Waiting to speak are Mr. Holloway, Mr. Penzel, Ms. Stahl, Mr. Grossman, Ms. Cunningham, Ms. Thal, Mr. Klein, Jocelyn Murphy, Mr. Englander, Mr. Bruce, Ms. Zimmerman, Mr. Perlman, Mr. Hefter, Mr. Leibovitz, Ms. Maddox, Ms. Goodwin, Ms. Friedman Gerspan, Mr. Trevitt, and Nancy Heller. All right. We will now vote on whether or not to vote on the main motion. Well, yep, whether to terminate debate, and the vote will happen now.
We have 173 yes, 47 no, 14 abstentions.
The motion passes with 173 yes, 47 no, and 14 abstentions. We will now vote on the main motion. The main motion can be found at page 21-6 to 21-7 of the combined reports. And the issuance is whether or not to issue a home rule petition regarding electrification betterment loans.
Okay, we have 190 yes, 38 no, 10 abstentions.
The motion passes with 190 yes, 38 no, and 10 abstentions. There is no motion being offered on Article 24, so we will move to Article 25. Article 25 is found on page 25-1 of the combined reports. It is a motion in substantially the words of the article on page 25-1. Some minor language would have to be changed on the first page, which is to change to see if, eliminate that, and insert the language voted that. So this article seeks to authorize the town of Brookline to adopt green zoning bylaws and Regulations. It is moved by Mr. Gray, seconded by Ms. Scanlon. And the speaker starting off is Ms. Cunningham, who will have 5 minutes. Lisa Cunningham.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Lisa Cunningham, and I'm an architect with a practice in. I'll wait until the slides are up. Thanks. I'm an architect with a practice in Brookline and also a co-petitioner of this suite of warrant articles. I'm going to give an overview of warrant article 25, our green zoning home rule petition. This warrant article lets the town impose green building standards in the form of zoning bylaws for the purposes of reducing our carbon emissions and addressing issues of health and equity, as well as saving our town and residents from having to do costly retrofits. Examples of green building standards includes things like fossil fuel-free standards, EV charging requirements, embodied carbon standards, and solar panels. Buildings account for about 2/3 of our carbon emissions in Brookline. Our building codes are meant to protect our health, safety, and welfare, but they are not responding to our climate crisis and our public health crisis. Next slide. So let's just look at the consequences of our lack of local zoning authority. California is one of 40 states in the country which has the ability to enforce local building requirements. There are only 10 states that don't, including Massachusetts. California has 62 communities who have enacted prohibitions on fossil fuel infrastructure since 2019, including Berkeley, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Sacramento. In the same time period, Massachusetts has 14 communities that have passed similar legislation, representing 17.5% of the state's population, but none have been able to enact prohibitions on fossil fuel infrastructure. Next page. Here's another example of many of why our new state building codes are not adequate and why we need local zoning authority through zoning. The new stretch code and the specialized code only require 20% of spaces in multi-unit buildings to be wired for EV chargers. They don't even require one actual charger to be installed. But installing car chargers after the fact is many times more expensive than doing it during construction, like everything. This is not equitable. Internal combustion vehicles won't be sold in Massachusetts after 2035. But in the meantime, the state is incentivizing the use of fossil fuels and impeding the very transition that they say must happen. Next slide. Massachusetts will soon have 3 building codes. We have heard some claims that the new codes are adequate or even good. I'm here to tell you that they are not, and every single state climate organization agrees with me. None of these codes are fossil fuel free. None of them are net zero. None of them address embodied carbon. None of them require EV chargers, among a list of many. Adding insult to injury, we are on a 3-year code renewal cycle. So right now we have no chance of improving these flawed standards anytime soon. We've also heard claims that architects will be confused, but both building codes and zoning codes are complex, and zoning codes vary considerably within towns. Architects, contractors, and developers are not confused. Next slide. Our building code has proven again and again to be a barrier to climate action. Failing to reduce our carbon emissions to the maximum extent possible perpetuates our climate crisis and creates real financial risks and creates toxic indoor and outdoor air quality, unhealthy buildings, and increased disease and death, which disproportionately harm our most at-risk residents. We need to be able to enact green building standards in the form of zoning bylaws for the purposes of reducing our carbon emissions and meeting our climate goals. We need to take action. So what happens next? We pass our home rule petitions. Other towns and cities follow us. Our home rule petition is approved. Town meeting passes new zoning bylaws with a 2/3 vote. Please vote yes on warrant article 25.
Thank you. Patty Correa. Please introduce yourself and your
Yes,
3
thank
minutes.
you.
Yes, thank you. Patty Correa for the advisory committee. First of all, I just want to note that petitioners have an amended motion with some minor changes that's in the supplement to tonight at page 6. Article 25's petitioner, as you know, is the town's Zero Emissions Advisory Board, which was created following a Collins Center report identifying a need for more focused, high-level leadership and coordination if the town wishes to advance compliance with its carbon reduction goals. As you know, ZEAB filed Article 25 along with Articles 21, 23, 26, 28, and 29 as part of the MCEP. Article 25 is a proposed home rule petition seeking local legislative authority to enact zoning bylaws to reduce the town's carbon footprint beyond fossil fuel restrictions and bans. In terms of fossil fuel restrictions, the town is expected to participate in a Department of Energy Resources demonstration project beginning in 2023 or so, piloting fossil fuel-free bylaws. The DOR pilot is created pursuant to this summer's passage of the Massachusetts Drive Act, which in turn grew out of the town's 2020 filing of a home rule petition seeking local legislative authority to enact fossil fuel restrictions and similar efforts by other municipalities. Article 25's explanation illustrates some examples of measures to reduce the town's carbon footprint, which could be deemed beyond the scope of the Drive Act language authorizing the DOER demonstration project. These include EV charging, passive house performance, gray water, heat waste recovery units, solar panels, to name a few in the article's explanation. The language of Article 25 is short and does not include any specific policy proposals. It seeks local legal authority only. Separate and apart from Article 25, the planning director confirmed to the advisory committee that she anticipates that her department will file a warrant article next spring to adopt a new state municipal opt-in stretch code. In addition, the state is about to release a new stretch code that the town will be subject to. At the October 19th advisory committee subcommittee meeting on Article 25, Associate Town Council Jonathan Simpson opined that there is no inherent conflict between the new stretch codes and Article 25. He said this is because Article 25 only seeks authority without spelling out any details for any proposed zoning bylaw, and that any zoning bylaw under Article 25 would be vetted and reviewed at that time. During its presentations before the advisory subcommittee and committee, petitioner centered its reasons for seeking the local legal authority on the state's 2050 net zero target and the town's 2040 net zero target. The petitioner conveyed that the state's interim 2025-2030 goals call for electrifying the heat of 100,000 homes per year, and approximately 500 per year are now being electrified. It cites previous town meeting efforts to reduce the town's carbon emissions that were disapproved by the Attorney General as the basis for seeking additional local legal authority now at the beginning of this legislative session. The petitioner states that town policy decisions and how to use the additional local legal authority would be subject to further vetting that any proposed zoning bylaw receives within the town. The advisory committee met on November 10th and voted no action on Article 25 by a split decision of 10 to 14 with 2 abstentions. Some reasons a 10-member majority of the advisory committee voted no action on Article 25 included the following perceptions and concerns. First, possible financial and administrative costs that local building standards could cause and which could disincentivize projects within the town and burden staff. Second, advantages of participating in statewide building standard uniformity, particularly given the upcoming new stretch code and opt-in municipal stretch code. Third, ineffectiveness of local electrification measures, given that the grid's continuing reliance on fossil fuels for now. There was a complaint regarding a lack of an overall blueprint for town measures and a lack of detail about utilization of the proposed expanded local legal authority. Some reasons a 10-member minority of the advisory committee voted favorable action include the following. First, it is necessary to advance electrification with the town and reduce its carbon emissions simultaneously with efforts underway to improve the renewables portfolio of the grid. Someone has to go first. Brookline should lead. Second, Article 25 only seeks authority and does not propose any policy proposal. Town meeting would need to approve a zoning bylaw implementing the local legal authority that would be vetted in detail. Third, the 2021 annual town meeting directed the town to take aggressive measures to implement the town's 2040 net zero goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Natalia Linos.
Good evening, Madam Moderator. Natalia Linos, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6, Chair of the Advisory Council on Public Health, and Board Member of the Environmental League of Massachusetts, speaking in my personal capacity in support of Warrant Article 25. As has been made clear by many of the speakers tonight, the climate emergency is an existential threat. And as an epidemiologist who previously led the climate and health portfolio at the UN Development Program and now works on health and human rights, I want to speak specifically to the health risks of inaction tonight. Building with fossil fuels, which is allowed under the state building code and possibly may still be allowed in part in the pilot program, puts our residents at risk. Indeed, air pollution is now recognized by the World Health Organization as one of the greatest environmental risks to health. The evidence points to a clear pattern: greater rates of disease from stroke to heart disease to lung cancer, leading to premature death for those exposed to poor air quality. And for children, studies have shown an increase of asthma from cooking with gas and an impact on childhood cognitive development. A recent Stanford study even found that gas stoves emit harmful toxins even while they are not in use. I believe in the next few years, as COVID has forced us to look at healthy buildings and ventilation more seriously, we will be document numerous additional health harms from buildings with fossil fuels. Here in Massachusetts, Boston College's Global Observatory on Planetary Health estimated that across our Commonwealth, air pollution, 95% of which is caused by the combustion of fossil fuels, is responsible for almost 3,000 deaths and over 15,000 cases of childhood asthma. Warrant Article 25 is about giving us the authority to take action to limit fossil fuel emissions and bypass what is so clear: an outdated building or an improper building code which harms health and our planet. For those of you who know me and my work, you know that my interest in health is centered around health equity. And I believe that the set of warrant articles before us tonight and this one are fundamentally ones that can help advance health equity, both inter and intragenerationally. The buildings we build today and the technologies or lack of technologies we use set a trajectory for health outcomes of the future. We set in place, literally in stone, through our buildings and constructions today, a worse future when we lock in residents to a fossil fuel system for potentially decades, when we have the tools today to do better. All electric construction improves both indoor and outdoor air quality and protects health directly and indirectly by limiting the many ways beyond pollution that climate change harms health. And I could go into a whole long lecture on that. But I believe that through green zoning, we can better ensure that all our residents, including the majority of residents who are renters, can have the same clean air in their homes. I worry as the evidence becomes stronger of the health harms, we can expect that wealthier families that are able to retrofit their homes will do so, and those who can't will be left behind, including renters who won't have the authority. So I urge you to vote in favor of Warrant Article 25. And my hope is that tonight, we won't only be improving the health and well-being of Brookline residents, but also setting a blueprint for what is possible to be replicated by other communities, including environmental justice communities in Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you. We now call on Linda Pelkey. Ms. Pelkey, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Linda Olson Pelkey, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 17, speaking for myself and in opposition to Warrant Article 25. When Town Meeting passed our fossil fuel-free zoning bylaw, it was rejected by the Attorney General in part because it dealt with the means and methods of construction that are regulated by our state building code. We had tried to use zoning to regulate things that zoning cannot regulate. There's a state statute 40A that is a zoning enabling legislation, and it sets out all the rules for how a town or city can regulate the use and dimensions of development. In contrast, the state building code lays out all kinds of particulars about how a building is put together, focusing on public health and safety, methods of construction, including energy use and electrification. I'm strongly in favor of decarbonizing our buildings. And in my opinion, the way to go is to make statewide building codes stronger. The solution to better buildings is not to allow municipalities to go rogue with their own building codes. This division between the two, zoning and building codes, makes sense. The state has done a lot to advance decarbonization in the building code. The Department of Energy Resources has developed an opt-in specialized building code that incorporates net zero performance standards. We will have the opportunity to adopt this code at next year's spring town meeting. The state has the expertise and the network of stakeholder collaborators to develop a workable, understandable, and uniform building code. They will train contractors and municipal building officials on how to use and enforce the new code. Instead, we are being asked to approve a home rule petition asking the state legislature for the authority to develop our own building code standards that could regulate materials and methods of construction, would regulate components, equipment, or infrastructure that could or could not be used, to set our own emission standards, utility construction standards, or enable drastic increases in height or density in exchange for decarbonization, none of which are necessary if we adopt the state's opt-in code. We've heard over and over that the particulars can be figured out later for all these articles. But that is only true for those parts of the petition that say may before them. We are making public policy for Brookline with our votes tonight. And if the legislature passes these home rule petitions, they become law. If you aren't convinced we really want to do all of these programs, you should vote no. We are also hearing the legislature will never approve this, so don't worry. Well, that is legislative malpractice in my view. We need to be careful what we wish for and actually ask for what we want, not play cat and mouse with the legislature. Make no mistake, individual town by town building standards are not in anyone's interests. Please vote no on warrant article 25.
Thank you. I believe it's Mr. Klein up next. Jesse Klein, I'm not sure.
Actually, it's Jonathan Klein.
No, I got the J right. Okay.
Close enough.
You have 3
Jonathan,
minutes.
thank you, Madam Moderator. Jonathan Klein, Precinct 17 resident. I'm a member of the Housing Advisory Board. I'm also a board member of Brookline for Everyone, which endorsed favorable action on warrant Article 25. But tonight I am speaking here for myself. I have 7 points I want to make, and I hope I will make them efficiently and not take too much of your time. One, in the spring 2020-21 town meeting, you've heard this before, town meeting adopted a resolution saying that we required an emergency response at emergency speed to the climate crisis, and we needed an aggressive and strategic plan. I'm going to repeat that. Emergency response at emergency speed and an aggressive and strategic plan. Number 2, I want to thank the ZEAB, the Zero Admissions Advisory Board, for proposing an aggressive and strategic plan and proposals to meet that emergency. That's exactly what we need. This is part of it, and I think it's an important part of it. Number 3, Brookline took the lead in fossil fuel-free regulation in 2019 and has been consistently frustrated by the Attorney General and the state law, and we still don't have that. 3 years later, we still don't have that. We went rogue. Now, if we hadn't gone rogue, we would not have the state pilot program today that gives us the opportunity in the near future to achieve that goal. But that was Brookline's leadership, that has created that. So we need more local authority to do the kind of work we need to address that emergency. Number 4, really a continuation. We need the flexibility to meet our aggressive goals. 50% reduction by 2030, and net zero by 2040. And as we have shown the state, we need the ability to innovate and experiment. It's that innovation and experimentation that led to the state's willingness to consider the pilot program that allows 10 communities to adopt fossil fuel-free codes in the near future, we hope. Number 5. Some have asked if this more detailed climate regulation and building regulation will impede our affordable housing goals. And the answer to that is a big no. Affordable housing developers are way ahead of the curve. I can report that 7 of our 40B developments that have been permitted or are in construction have already adopted and agreed to go fossil fuel free, despite the fact that that is not yet a legal requirement in Brookline. Developers do not have a problem with detailed climate regulation as long as it is clear and definite.
You have 10 seconds.
Okay, so back to where I started. We have a situation that requires an emergency response at emergency speed. Let's get started. Please vote favorable action on warrant article 25 to help Brookline stay in the lead and the forefront on climate action. Thank you.
I want to remind speakers to address the article that is at issue. As Mr. Gray pointed out, you can stray some, but to not address the article at all wastes people's time. From whom? Anthony Ishak. I'm gonna call on 1 or 2 more people. Lee Selwyn, before I allow the motion to call the question.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yep.
I have one slide, if I could put that up.
Okay, you have 3 minutes.
I'm Lee Selwyn, town meeting member of precinct 13 and a member of the advisory committee. I'm speaking for myself, and I think for some of the majority in the advisory committee who voted no action on this article. I don't have a problem, and I would support a home rule petition that gave Brookline the authority to address the specific objectives that the proponents of warrant article 25 have suggested that we need, such as the ability to mandate EV charging and electrification in Brookline buildings. However, what is being asked for in this article goes far further than that. The article is basically asking for authority to supersede the state building code with respect to the use of materials and methods of construction. The use these are the highlighted words on the slide. The use, inclusion, or prohibition of certain design elements and so on. That is what the building code is all about. You can take the slide down now. This is the state building code. It's a very big book. It weighs 6 or 7 pounds. It has 700 or 800 pages. And what that specific language is asking the legislature to do is to give Brookline the ability to pretty much scrap the state building code. Now, some of the proponents have suggested that somehow Massachusetts is in the minority because we're only one of 10 states that has a state building code. And the implication is that we're somehow in the backwater. Actually, having a uniform state building code is a strength, not a weakness. And we should both be proud of it and also be very careful about allowing it to be dismantled. A state building code assures that standards of construction, safety measures, and various other aspects of buildings are maintained. State building codes, our state building code is monitored by experts who enforce it, who revise it as needed, who address it, and who are in a position to administer it on a statewide uniform basis. And if Brookline had simply, if the proponents here had simply asked the legislature for a very specific authority to do the specific things that they want to accomplish, I'd support it. But I can't support the notion that we can supersede the state building code at such a broad level. Now, the proponents of this whole series of ZAB articles seem to be pursuing the notion that the ends justify the means. And yes, the end is very important, and I have no disagreement with them as to the importance of getting to zero emissions. But they're overreaching, and they're overreaching in the extreme, and Article 25 is a very good example of that overreaching. It's unnecessary to ask for authority to go beyond what we really need to do, and that's exactly what's being done. Now, if the legislature gives us the authority, and you're being told, well, we may not use it, we just want the capability to use it, be careful what you give Brookline the authority to do, because it may come back to bite you. And
Could you
I'll
please
talk
finish
about
up, Mr.
that.
Selwyn?
I'll just a few more seconds. I'll talk about that some more when I discuss Article 26. So please vote no action on this article. Thank you.
Okay, we have some questions. Jonathan Margolis.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. John Margolis, Precinct 7 and Library Trustee. Actually, I think Linda Pelkey and Lee Selwyn have probably said it better than I can. As a lawyer who spent years representing tenants when landlords refused or failed to abide by the state building code and sanitary code, I am loath to provide authority to enact zoning regulations that cannot be knocked down because they violate what, as Mr. Selwyn said, are long worked out standards for building construction. And I agree with him that this article is not necessary to the overall goal of climate improvement. So I'm voting no. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Krepchin, you say you have a question, but you are also in line to speak. So I'm going to take you at your word that you have an actual question and you are not jumping the line because there are many people in front of you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I do have an actual question. My name is Ira Krepshin, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 15. And the question involves, well, last year, Town Meeting unanimously passed a resolution in support of low carbon concrete as a way to reduce our carbon footprint with little or no penalty in cost or performance. Concrete accounts for 8 to 10% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. Since then, availability of products has expanded and specification guidance has improved, and the federal government has launched a Buy Clean initiative to spur the development of low-carbon construction materials made in America. Yet none of the Massachusetts state energy codes that are available deal with this embodied carbon. As a reminder of why this is so important, it takes 30 years for operation.
Okay, and we're building up to a question here.
We are. Surprise moment. It could take 30 years of operational carbon, for example, lights and HVAC and so on, from a typical building to equal the embodied carbon generated leading up to completion of that building. So for the first few decades of its existence, most of a building's emissions will have resulted from embodied carbon, hence the urgency in reducing it. So my question is, will warrant Article 25 allow us to expand and codify our support for low embodied carbon beyond town facilities?
Mr. Gray.
I think the answer is yes. Lisa Cunningham may be able to expand.
Ms. Cunningham?
Hi, Ira, thank you for the question. I really appreciate it. And yes, that's a perfect example of why we are seeking this authority. When you led Brookline to pass that warrant article was a resolution that only affects our town, our municipal work in Brookline. And if we had this type of authority, we could actually do this throughout Brookline. So that is a great question. The other thing I wanted to add to in response to the assertions about regulating building safety, we have no intention of regulating building safety. That's why we wrote our home rule petition so that the legislature could edit it. We will be working with them to make sure that there's adequate review to identify any cases in which we may be interfering with building safety, but we don't believe that's the case. There's been many cases actually of zoning bylaws that are already on the books where they are climate green zoning authority, which has not interfered with our building safety. So that's not our intention. We don't believe that's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham. I appreciate that. There's been a motion to call the question. After I have a second, I will let you know who is waiting to speak. Is there a second? Miriam Ashkenazi has seconded it. The people who are waiting to speak are Mr. Christ, Mr. Scanlon, Mr. Mendels, Mr. Gray, Mr. Lowy, Ms. Stahl, Mr. Englander, Ms. Thal, Mr. Bruce, Ms. Correa, Mr. Krepchen, Gideon Koltoff, Jennifer Goldsmith, Amanda Zimmerman, and John Harris. Okay, let's vote on whether or not to close debate on article number. Well, I can't see them, so they don't exist. Okay, what are the results?
165 yes, 48 no, 16 abstentions.
The motion passes with 165 yes, 48 no, and 16 abstentions. Before we vote on the motion itself, I want to make sure we have the language right. I hope I mentioned that on the first page of Article 25, the first sentence should be changed from to see if the town will vote to authorize, should be changed to voted that the town authorize. And on page 25(2), the language or take any other action in relation thereto should be deleted. Now, we are ready to vote on the article, which is whether or not to establish a green zoning or the green zoning bylaws and regulations, a home rule petition.
We have 160 yes, 72 no, 9 abstentions.
The motion passes with 160 yes, 72 no, and 9 abstentions. I will now happily entertain a motion to adjourn. Anyone? You're kidding me. Do we have a sec, Wendy Friedman? Okay. We have a motion and a second. Okay, thank you. Okay, now we can vote on whether or not to adjourn. Okay. Adjourn until November 29th. Yeah. What's that? What is? Oh, I know. Oh, sorry. What is the result?
Okay, we have 160 yes, 79 no, 7 abstentions.
Okay, the motion passes by a smaller margin than I would have predicted, with 160 yes, 79 no, and 7 abstentions. Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone.